After dinner, they put Evan to bed. Evan lay in his small bed, holding his new remote control car. When will Lily come back? Very soon. Mom tucked in his blanket. Close your eyes and sleep. You'll see your sister tomorrow morning. Then I'll let Lily play with my new toy, too. Evan said softly. Okay, you can share with Lily. The light went off. Mom gently closed the door. In the living room, the clock pointed to 10:30. Dad sat on the sofa staring at his phone. The screen was lit, but he wasn't really looking at anything. He just kept opening Snapchat. Closing it, opening it, closing it. Mom paced back and forth in the living room, walking to the window for the third time to look down. Nathan, she finally couldn't hold it in. Let's go out and look for her. Look for what? Dad didn't look up, though his voice lacked conviction. Let her come back on her own. But it's so cold outside, and she's so small. Mom's voice took on a tearful quality. Dad said nothing, but his fingers, gripping the phone, tightened. The clock on the wall went tick-tock. Tick-tock, 11 o'clock. Dad suddenly stood up and grabbed his coat. Let's go. They rushed out the door. I followed behind, watching them search the neighborhood, search the children's playground, search every path while calling my name. Lily. Lily. Mom's voice scattered in the night wind, carrying increasingly obvious panic. Her voice was already getting hoarse. She kept shouting call after call. Dad initially kept a stern face, but soon he too grew anxious. He ran to the security office to check the surveillance footage and saw the small figure on the screen dragging a blue suitcase. Walking out of the neighborhood gate at 9:08, she actually took a suitcase. Dad's face went white. Mom covered her mouth. Tears finally fell. They drove out to search, following the western route street by street. Mom kept her face pressed against the car window, looking outside, murmuring Lily. Lily, where are you? Dad said nothing, but the car went faster and faster. They searched for a long time, long enough for the shops along the road to turn off their lights. One by one, long enough for all the pedestrians on the street to disappear. The air in the car grew heavier and more oppressive. After driving through another empty street, Dad pulled the car over to the side of the road. He gripped the steering wheel and stayed silent for a long time. Let's call the police. Mom forced out these 3 words. Dad nodded and picked up his phone. Before he could dial, the screen lit up. First, the ringtone exploded in the quiet car, piercingly anxiety-inducing. He glanced at it. An unknown number. He answered impatiently. Hello? I leaned over and heard a calm male voice on the other end. Is this the parent of Lily Harper? This is Central City Hospital. The car pulled into the neighborhood and parked. Mom carried the cake box. Dad carefully held the astronaut model. They went upstairs laughing, discussing how to surprise me. I followed behind them, passing through door after door. Returning home, the living room light came on. Lily, we're home. Mom's voice carried a smile. Look what Mom and Dad got you. No one answered. Dad placed the astronaut model on the coffee table, right next to the cracked old one. One old, one new, like twins. Is she asleep? Mom said softly, tiptoeing toward my room. I followed her. She gently pushed open the door, speaking softly. Lily, Mom's coming in. The room was quiet, with only the occasional sound of wind rustling the leaves outside. Lily, are you asleep? Mom called again, her voice even softer. She waited a few seconds, receiving no response from me. Hearing no rustling of blankets, the room light was turned on. The bed was neatly made, the blanket folded squarely. Mom's breathing quickened. Nathan, come here. Her voice began to tremble. Lily's gone. Dad came over, glanced into the room, and his expression immediately darkened. This child is getting more and more out of control. His voice shook with anger. Just because I said a few words to her. She's playing runaway with me.
Keep your voice down.
Mom glanced at Evan and tugged at Dad's arm. Don't scare the child. Dad's voice got louder. To buy her an identical toy, we went to 3 stores. And she has the nerve to walk out over a little criticism. So inconsiderate. Mom collapsed onto my bed, her hand touching the smooth sheets. It's so late. Where could she have gone? Where else? She's just trying to spite us. Dad paced around the room. Don't worry. She can't have gone far. When she gets cold and hungry, she'll come back on her own. Evan stood in the doorway, holding his remote control car, asking timidly, where did Lily go? Your sister was naughty and snuck out. Dad said irritably. Don't worry about her. Let her think things through. But Mom wanted to say something. No buts. Dad cut her off. You spoil her too much. At such a young age. She dares to run away from home. Ridiculous. Evan's voice came from the living room.
Mom.
I'm hungry. Can I have cake? Mom wiped her eyes and stood up. Go ahead. They returned to the living room. Mom opened a cake box. Bright red strawberries were arranged in a circle on the cream. She cut the cake into 4 pieces. giving one to Dad, one to Evan. Then looked at the piece with the most strawberries and said softly, "This piece is for Lily." I watched them sit at the dining table. Evan ate happily, cream all over his face. Dad ate his cake in silence, his expression still ugly. Mom ate in small bites, but her eyes kept fixed on the front door. "It's so sweet," Evan said. "Is Lily sweet too?"
Sweet.
Mom touched his head. "We'll save it for when Lily comes back. But your sister can't come back anymore." I wanted to say it, but I couldn't make a sound. After dinner, they put Evan to bed. Evan lay in his small bed, holding his new remote control car. "When will Lily come back?" "Very soon." Mom tapped in his blanket.
Close your eyes and sleep.
"You'll see your sister tomorrow morning. Then I'll let Lily play with my new toy, too." Evan said softly. "Okay, you can share with Lily." The light went off. Mom gently closed the door. In the living room, the clock pointed to 10:30. Dad sat on the sofa, staring at his phone. The screen was lit, but he wasn't really looking at anything. He just kept opening and closing apps, opening and closing them. Mom paced back and forth in the living room, walking to the window for the third time to look down. "Nathan." She finally couldn't hold it in. "Let's go out and look for her." "Look for what?" Dad didn't look up, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let her come back on her own." "But it's so cold outside, and she's so small." Mom's voice took on a tearful quality. Dad said nothing, but his fingers, gripping the phone, tightened. The clock on the wall went tick-tock. Tick-tock, 11 o'clock. Dad suddenly stood up and grabbed his coat. "Let's go." They rushed out the door. I followed behind, watching them search the neighborhood, search the children's playground, search every path, while calling my name. "Lily! Lily!" Mom's voice scattered in the night wind, carrying increasingly obvious panic. Her voice was already getting hoarse, but she kept shouting call after call. Dad initially kept a stern face, but soon he too grew anxious. He ran to the security office to check the surveillance footage, and saw the small figure on the screen, dragging a blue suitcase, walking out of the neighborhood gate at 9:08. She actually took a suitcase. Dad's face went white. Mom covered her mouth. Tears finally fell. They drove out to search, following the western route street by street. Mom kept her face pressed against the car window, looking outside, murmuring, "Lily. Lily, where are you?" Dad said nothing, but the car went faster and faster. They searched for a long time. Long enough for the shops along the road to turn off their lights. One by one. Long enough for all the pedestrians on the street to disappear. The air in the car grew heavier and more oppressive. After driving through another empty street, Dad pulled the car over to the side of the road. He gripped the steering wheel and stayed silent for a long time. "Let's call the police." Mom forced out these 3 words. Dad nodded and picked up his phone. Before he could dial, the screen lit up. First, the ringtone exploded in the quiet car piercingly, anxiety-inducing. He glanced at it. An unknown number. He answered impatiently. "Hello?" I leaned over and heard a calm male voice on the other end. "Is this the parent of Lily Harper?" "This is Central City Hospital." The rest of the words didn't reach me, 'cause at that moment something grabbed me. Not a hand, not exactly. More like a current. A force pulling me backward. Away from the car, away from my parents, away from everything I knew. I tried to resist.
Try.
I had to grab onto something. The seat, Dad's shoulder, anything. But my fingers passed through everything like smoke. The world blurred around me, colors bleeding into each other like wet paint. And then everything stopped. I was standing in a white room.
No windows, no doors.
Just white walls, white floor, white ceiling. In the center of the room was a desk. On the desk was a small wooden box. I walked toward it.
My feet made no sound.
And opened the lid. Inside was a single photograph. An orphanage. A row of children, all wearing the same gray clothes, all staring at the camera with hollow eyes. In the front row, a little girl with messy hair and a faded red ribbon.
Me.
But I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking at the edge of the frame, where a woman's hand was visible, reaching into the photo. A woman wearing a ring. I recognized Mom's ring. I frowned and looked closer. The photo had been taken before I was adopted, before Mom ever set foot in that orphanage. So, how was her hand in the picture? I picked up the photo to examine it more carefully. Something fell out from behind it.
A key.
Small, silver, glinting in the white light. Attached to it was a tag with 4 words, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Find the second door." The walls flickered for just a moment, less than a heartbeat. I saw something behind them. Shadows. Shapes. A hallway that stretched in directions that shouldn't exist. And the white returned, solid and unbroken. But the key in my hand felt warm. And somewhere far, far away, or maybe right next to me, I heard a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here, Lily." I spun around. The room was empty. But on the floor, where nothing had been before, lay a single red strawberry. Fresh, perfect, and still wet, as if someone had just set it down. I stared at the strawberry. The vibrant red of it felt violently loud against the sterile, blinding whiteness of the room. I knelt down. My knees didn't hit a hard floor. It felt like kneeling on compressed silence. I reached out, my transparent fingers trembling. When I touched the fruit, a jolt of cold electricity shot up my arm. It was real. I could smell the faint, sugary scent of the cream it had been resting on just minutes, or lifetimes, ago. Mom's cream. You're not supposed to be here, Lily. The voice hadn't come from behind me. It had come from the key in my hand. I opened my palm. The silver key was vibrating, glowing with a faint, pulsing heat. The tag that read "Find the second door" was turning black at the edges, as if being burned by an invisible flame. I looked at the walls. Still perfectly white.
No seams. No hinges.
But the shadows I had seen flickering behind the surface earlier were returning. They writhed like fish trapped beneath a layer of ice. I gripped the strawberry in my left hand and the key in my right. "Where is the door?" I whispered. My voice didn't echo. It was swallowed instantly by the room.
Push.
The whisper was in my head this time. I walked up to the blank wall directly in front of me. I raised the key, the jagged teeth glinting, and pressed it against the solid white surface. It didn't scrape against paint or drywall. It sank in. The wall yielded like thick, cold gel. I pushed the key deeper, turning my wrist. A sickening click resonated through the space, followed by the sound of tearing fabric. A vertical line split the wall from ceiling to floor. Blackness spilled out of the crack, thick and smelling faintly of rain and exhaust fumes. I stepped through. Instantly, the oppressive silence of the white room was replaced by a cacophony of sound, muted but chaotic. I was standing in a narrow corridor built of raw wooden beams and exposed pipes. It looked like the backstage of a theater, but the walls were lined with doors. Hundreds of them. Some were regular bedroom doors. Others were heavy steel hospital doors. Some were just frames hanging in the void. I walked down the corridor. Below me, the floor wasn't wood, it was glass. And, beneath the glass, I saw my parents. They were in the car. Dad was still holding the phone to his ear, his face frozen in a mask of absolute terror. "Which hospital?" Dad croaked. His voice bled through the glass floor, distorted but recognizable. Is my daughter okay?" I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands against the glass.
Dad.
"I'm here," I screamed. He didn't look up. Mom was clawing at his arm, her eyes wide, breathless, pleading for an answer he couldn't give. Dad dropped the phone. It clattered against the center console. He turned to Mom, his lips moving, but no sound came out. He didn't need to speak. The way his shoulders collapsed, the way his hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, it told her everything. Mom's scream shattered the quiet of the car. It was a primal, tearing sound that made me cover my ears even in this strange, ghostly corridor. She thrashed against her seatbelt, hitting the dashboard, hitting the window, crying my name over and over. Dad pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair, and I saw his shoulders heaving. I watched my strong, irritable, impatient father break into a million pieces. I sobbed, hitting the glass.
I'm sorry.
"I'm sorry I ran away. I'm right here." But the glass beneath me shifted, pulling the scene away like a conveyor belt. The car vanished into the dark, replaced by a new scene sliding into view beneath my feet. It was Central City Hospital, the morgue. A doctor was leading my parents into a freezing room. I saw myself. I was lying on a steel table, covered by a white sheet. My blue suitcase sat in the corner of the room, one of its wheels cracked, the plastic dented and smeared with dark asphalt. Mom couldn't walk. Dad had to half-carry her to the table. When the doctor pulled back the sheet, Mom's knees gave out completely. Dad caught her, but his eyes were fixed on my face. My skin was pale, a terrible purplish bruise covering the side of my head. I looked so small, smaller than I felt. "Time of death, 9:24 p.m., the doctor murmured gently. The driver said she darted out from between parked cars. He slammed on the brakes, but it was raining. She was dragging the suitcase. It caught on the curb. I backed away from the glass floor, my chest tight with a panic that belonged to the living. I was dead. It wasn't a nightmare. I had actually died. You were always going to. I spun around. Standing a few feet away in the shadowy corridor was a woman. She was tall, dressed in a sharp gray suit, holding a clipboard. Her face was blurry like a photograph taken out of focus. "Who are you?" I demanded, my ghostly voice trembling. "I am an auditor," she said, her voice a flat, bureaucratic monotone. "And you, Lily Harper, are an anomaly. You didn't board the ferry. You got stuck in the waiting room, and then you found a back door." She pointed to the silver key in my hand. "That doesn't belong to you. Hand it over." No. I stepped back. What is this place? The architecture of your timeline, the auditor sighed. It's crumbling because you refuse to conclude. Give me the key, Lily. Your parents are mourning. It's over. It's time to move on. What about the photograph? I shouted, holding up my empty hand as if the picture were still in it. The orphanage. Mom's hand was in the picture before she ever met me. Why? The auditor paused. The blur over her face seemed to ripple. You shouldn't have seen that. That is classified under temporal loop protocols. Tell me. I screamed, a sudden, inexplicable anger surging through me. The corridor shook. Dust fell from the exposed pipes. I realized with a shock that because I was dead, my emotions had physical weight here. The auditor took a cautious step back. Your mother, she isn't native to this timeline, Lily. I froze. What? Look to your left.
Door 402.
I turned. A heavy oak door stood slightly ajar. I walked toward it and pushed it open. The scent of bleach and stale cabbage hit me. I knew that smell. The orphanage. I stepped through the door and found myself standing in the director's office. It was raining outside. Sitting in the leather chair opposite the director was Mom. But she looked different. She looked older, her hair streaked with gray, deep bags under her hollow, grieving eyes. Mrs. Harper, the director said gently. I don't understand. You came in specifically asking for a girl named Lily. We do have a Lily, but how did you know she was here? How did you know what she looked like? Mom's hands were shaking in her lap. I looked closely at her left hand. There was the ring, the exact one from the photograph. Please, Mom whispered, her voice cracking. Just let me adopt her. I have the paperwork. I have the money. Please. Mrs. Harper, you are a single woman. Your background check says you were married, but your husband. Nathan left me, Mom interrupted, tears spilling down her cheeks. After the accident. He couldn't bear to look at me. Neither could Evan. My family fell apart. I stood in the corner of the office, my mind spinning. After the accident? Nathan left her? Evan? The accident? The director asked softly. My daughter. Mom sobbed, burying her face in her hands. My daughter Lily. She ran away from home on her 9th birthday because Nathan yelled at her over a broken toy. She took her blue suitcase. She was hit by a car at 9:24 p.m. She died. The director looked horrified. I am so sorry, but I don't understand. If your daughter died, why are you here looking for a child with the exact same name? Mom looked up, her eyes wild, desperate, and filled with a terrifying resolve. Because she didn't die yet. Not here. The office dissolved around me into smoke. I fell backward into the corridor, landing hard on the wooden planks. The auditor was standing above me, looking down with something akin to pity. Do you understand now, Lily? The auditor said softly. Your mother couldn't live with the guilt. Her reality collapsed. She sought out a broker, someone who deals in second chances. She traded the rest of her natural life to fold time, to come back to a parallel timeline, right to the orphanage, to adopt you all over again, to give you a better life, to stop the accident. My head was spinning. So, I am her daughter, but I'm also adopted? You are a variant. In her original timeline, you were her biological child. She went back to a timeline where you were orphaned, intending to integrate seamlessly, to raise you right this time, to ensure that on the night of your 9th birthday, you wouldn't run away. But I did. I whispered, horror pooling in my stomach. Dad yelled at me. They bought a new toy for Evan instead of fixing my astronaut. It played out exactly the same way. Time is a current, Lily, the auditor said. It corrects itself. She tried to change things. She tried to spoil you, tried to protect you. But human nature is flawed. Nathan still lost his temper. You still felt unloved. You still packed that blue suitcase.
No.
I looked at the silver key in my hand. Find the second door. That's what the tag said. Mom gave me this key, didn't she? When she came back. The broker gave her a safeguard, the auditor admitted. A temporal skeleton key. In case she failed, she hid it in the architecture of your soul. But you using it will tear this reality apart. The loop must close. You died at 9:24. You have to let it go. I can save myself, I said, standing up, my grip tightening on the key. If I find the door that leads to 9:08 p.m., the moment I walked out the gate, I can stop myself from leaving. I can fix it. If you do that, you paradox this entire timeline, the auditor warned, her voice losing its calm. If you don't die tonight, the version of your mother that traveled back in time has no reason to exist. She will vanish. Evan's new timeline will erase. You will destroy them. I didn't listen. I turned and ran down the corridor. Find the second door. I sprinted past doors, showing fragments of my life. Me, scraping my knee at age 7. Dad, carrying me on his shoulders at the zoo. Evan, handing me a dandelion. Mom, looking at me with a sadness I never understood until now, the look of a woman terrified of a ticking clock. "Stop," the auditor shouted. The corridor began to collapse behind me. The wooden beams snapped. The glass floor shattered, dropping into an infinite starry void. The physics of the space were failing, rejecting my presence. I looked at the doors. None of them said second door. Then I realized. The tag didn't mean a literal door. 9:08 p.m. The front door of our apartment building. The neighborhood gate. The second door I walked through that night. Ahead of me, a pair of heavy iron gates stood in the middle of the hallway. The neighborhood exit. Through the bars, I could see the rain falling on the wet asphalt. I could hear the distant rumble of traffic. I sprinted toward it. The floor beneath my feet was turning to sand, disintegrating. I lunged forward, slamming the silver key into the padlock holding the iron gates shut. I twisted it. The lock shattered like ice. I pushed the gates open and fell through. Cold rain hit my face. The smell of wet earth and exhaust filled my lungs. I was standing on the sidewalk just outside our neighborhood. The street lamps flickered overhead, casting long, orange reflections on the puddles. I looked down. I was transparent. A ghost in the rain.
Clack, clack.
Clack. The sound of plastic wheels rolling over concrete. I turned. Walking out of the neighborhood gate, head bowed against the wind, dragging a blue suitcase, was me. 9-year-old Lily.
Alive.
Sniffling. Wiping tears from her cheeks, furious at the world, furious at Dad for yelling, furious at Evan for being the favorite. "Lily!" I screamed. She didn't hear me. She kept walking. I looked at a digital clock glowing in the window of a nearby convenience store. 9:22 p.m. I had 2 minutes. I ran to my physical self and stood in front of her. "Stop. Please, turn around. Go back home." She walked right through me. A shiver passed over her shoulders and she pulled her coat tighter, but she didn't stop. "God, please," I panicked. I reached out to grab her arm, but my hand passed through her flesh. I had no physical substance. I couldn't stop her. I looked down the street. 2 blocks away, a pair of headlights turned the corner. The car was moving fast, speeding through the yellow lights, its tires hissing on the wet road.
No, no, no. Isubat.
I ran alongside my physical self. "Lily, wait. Don't cross. Just wait." We reached the intersection. It was exactly 9:23 p.m. The physical Lily stopped at the curb. She looked down at her broken blue suitcase. She sniffled and looked back toward the neighborhood. For a split second, I saw hesitation in her eyes. She wanted to go back. She was cold. She was hungry. Then, she remembered Dad's harsh words. So inconsiderate. Her face hardened. She gripped the handle of the suitcase tighter. The headlights were a block away now.
Approaching fast.
She stepped off the curb.
No.
I threw my ghost body in front of her, trying to push her back. Nothing happened. Then I remembered what I was still holding in my left hand. The strawberry. The physical object from the construct. The tether to the living world. The piece of cake Mom had set aside for me. If I couldn't touch her, maybe she could see this. With all the spiritual strength I had left, I threw the strawberry directly into her path. It hit the wet asphalt with a soft smack, rolling perfectly to a stop right in front of the toe of her left shoe. The physical Lily froze. She looked down. A single, perfect, bright red strawberry sitting in the middle of a dirty, rain-slicked road. She stared at it, confused. Her brow furrowed. She let go of the suitcase handle and took a half step back, crouching down to look at the impossible fruit.
Whoosh.
The car tore past her, inches from her face. The wind from the speeding vehicle blew her hood back. The tires clipped the edge of the blue suitcase, spinning it violently, shattering the plastic shell, but missing Lily entirely. The car's brake lights flared red in the distance, but it didn't stop. It kept going, disappearing into the night. Lily fell backward onto the sidewalk, gasping, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at the destroyed suitcase, then at the road where the car had just been. She burst into tears. Not tears of anger anymore, but tears of pure, unadulterated terror. She scrambled away from the curb, leaving the broken suitcase behind, and ran back toward the neighborhood gate. "I want my mom," she cried, running as fast as her little legs could carry her. "Mom." I stood in the rain, watching her go. I had done it. I had stopped the accident. She was going home. But as I watched her fade into the shadows of the neighborhood, I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I felt a cold, terrifying numbness creeping up my legs. I looked down at my hands. They were dissolving. Not fading like a ghost, but breaking apart into glowing golden embers, floating upward like ash from a fire. The auditor appeared beside me. She was holding an umbrella, though the rain didn't seem to touch her anyway. "You changed the fixed point," the auditor said softly. "She's alive," I whispered, watching my legs turn into golden dust.
She is.
Which means the future where she dies no longer exists. which means the older version of your mother, who traded her life to come back, no longer has a reason to be here. I snapped my head toward the auditor.
What? No.
No, you said she came back to save me. Time is a ledger, Lily. The mother sitting in your living room right now is an anomaly from a dead timeline. If the accident doesn't happen, the loop breaks. Reality must correct the paradox. What does that mean? I cried, grasping the auditor's lapel, my hands burning away as I touched her. What happens to Mom? She will be erased, the auditor said gently. The universe will weave a new timeline. Your father will remain. Little Evan will remain. Lily will return home. But the mother who baked that cake, the mother who fractured time to save you, will simply cease to have ever existed.
No.
I screamed. The golden ash was eating away at my torso now. Take it back. I didn't know. It's too late, the auditor said. You made your choice. You chose to let the girl live. Dad can't raise us alone. He's impatient, he's angry. He needs her. Evan needs her. I need her. You aren't going to be there either, Lily, the auditor said, her blurry face forming into a sad, sympathetic smile. You are a remnant of the loop. You fade with her. Panic clawed at my fading mind. I looked frantically around the wet street. The silver key. Where was the silver key? It was lying in a puddle near the curb. I threw myself toward it, crawling on my vanishing elbows. My fingers brushed the cold metal. Find the second door. The first door was the orphanage. The second door was the gate. But there was a third option. The key belonged to me. Mom had hidden it in my soul. I grabbed the key. How do I save her? I begged the empty air. How do I save Mom? The auditor watched me. There is only one way to maintain a paradox. A substitution of equal weight. A soul for a soul. If you anchor her to the timeline, you take her place in the void. Do it. I didn't hesitate. I didn't even think. If you do this, Lily, you will not go to an afterlife. You will not rest. You will become part of the architecture. You will hold the door open for her, forever. Do it. I screamed. I gripped the silver key with both hands and plunged it directly into my own chest. A blinding, deafening explosion of white light erupted from my heart. It didn't burn. It felt like plunging into freezing water. The sound of the rain, the city, the auditor, everything was instantly muted. I felt myself stretching, expanding, becoming the walls, the floor, the ticking clock, the ticking rain. I felt my consciousness splintering into a million pieces, weaving into the fabric of my home, wrapping around the timeline, holding it together with the sheer force of a child's love. 9:45 p.m. The living room. Mom was pacing. She had walked to the window for the 50th time. The clock ticked.
Tick. Tock.
The cake sat on the table, the one slice with the most strawberries waiting perfectly on its plate. Dad was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. The anger had completely drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, gnawing dread. Suddenly, the front door handle jiggled. Mom froze. Dad's head snapped up. The door pushed open slowly. Standing in the doorway, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, was Lily. She was covered in dirt from falling on the sidewalk. She had no suitcase. Mom, Lily whimpered. Mom let out a sound that wasn't human. A wail of absolute, profound relief. She sprinted across the room, falling to her knees and dragging Lily into her chest, burying her face in the wet, dirty coat.
Lily.
Oh my God, Lily, my baby. Mom sobbed, kissing her face, her hair, her cold hands. Dad was right behind her. The stern, irritable man was weeping openly. He wrapped his massive arms around both of them, pulling them into a tight, desperate embrace. I'm sorry, Dad choked out, burying his face in Lily's shoulder. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I'll never yell at you again. I promise. I promise. I was almost hit by a car, Lily cried, clinging to Mom's neck. It was so fast. But something stopped me. Mom pulled back, her eyes frantic, checking Lily for injuries. Are you hurt? Did it hit you?
No, Lily is fled. I'm okay.
I just want to stay home. You're never leaving, Mom cried, hugging her again. Never. From the hallway, Evan emerged, rubbing his sleepy eyes, dragging his new remote control car. Lily's back, he mumbled. Dad reached out and pulled Evan into the hug, too. All four of them, huddled on the floor by the front door, a family unbroken. From my vantage point, I watched them. I was no longer a ghost in the room. I was the room. I was the warm glow of the lamp. I was the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I was the ticking of the clock. I watched Mom carry Lily to the bathroom, draw a warm bath, and gently wash the dirt from her hair. I watched Dad carefully throw away the cracked old astronaut model and place the new one squarely on Lily's nightstand. I watched them put her to bed, tucking her in, the same way they had tucked in Evan. Later, when the apartment was finally quiet and the children were asleep, Mom and Dad sat at the kitchen table. They were exhausted, traumatized, but deeply, miraculously at peace. Dad reached across the table and took Mom's hand. He kissed her knuckles. "We need to be better," he whispered. "Both of us." Mom nodded, tears brimming in her eyes again. "We will." She looked down at the cake on the table. The slice she had cut for Lily was still there. But as Mom looked at it, her brow furrowed. She leaned in closer. Dad noticed. "What is it?" Mom didn't answer. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly. The cake slice was supposed to have the most strawberries on it. She remembered arranging them perfectly, but one was missing. There was a small, empty indent in the white cream where a strawberry had been. Mom stared at the indent. A strange, unexplainable chill washed over her. A phantom memory of a white room, of a desperate bargain made in the dark, flickered in her mind and vanished just as quickly. She didn't know why, but a profound, aching sadness bloomed in her chest. She stood up slowly, compelled by an instinct she couldn't name. She walked out of the kitchen, down the hallway, and gently pushed open Lily's bedroom door. Lily was fast asleep, her breathing steady and calm. Mom walked over to the nightstand to check the new astronaut model Dad had placed there. She stopped dead. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. There, resting perfectly in the cupped, plastic hands of the new astronaut toy, was a single, bright red strawberry. It was fresh, perfect, and still wet, as if someone had just set it down out of the rain. Mom stared at the fruit. She slowly reached out and touched it. It was cold. She looked around the quiet, empty room. She looked at her sleeping daughter, then back at the strawberry. She didn't understand the physics of it. She didn't remember the time loop, or the auditor, or the silver key. But a mother knows. Even across erased timelines and fractured realities, a mother's soul recognizes its own. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She picked up the strawberry, held it to her heart, and looked up at the ceiling. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room. And from the walls, from the floorboards, from the very air around her, she felt a gentle, invisible warmth wrap around her shoulders. An embrace that would never, ever fade.